Good morning and/or good afternoon, and welcome to ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar series. My name is Tricia Zulik, your moderator. It's my pleasure to introduce Ernie and Tracey Richardson, co-authors of the Toyota Engagement Equation, How to Understand and Implement Continuous Process Improvement Thinking in Any Organization. Versus me doing a full introduction of Tracey and Ernie, I'm going to turn the mic over to them right away so that we can see what they have to offer us today in this 1-hour webinar. Stand by as we're joined by Ernie and Tracey.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We'd like to thank ASQ LED Division for having us. We're proud to share our book, The Toyota Engagement Equation, and some highlights with it. We look forward to sharing each one of the slides and kind of going through some details. Our background is with Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky, and we both started as hourly employees, and we worked up through salary. And Toyota has a lot of prereq class, so to speak, through the Toyota Institute and the University of Toyota. And so, we're going to be sharing some of our experiences briefly. We've shared a lot of those stories and experiences in the book, and so we'll just be highlighting and going through some of the climate or the cultural aspects of those experiences. And, we'll kind of be going back and forth, Ernie and I, through some of these slides, and as we said, going through breaking down the formula. So I'll let Ernie quickly introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, this is Ernie Richardson, as Tracey mentioned. Thanks for having us, and I look forward to doing our presentation. Spent 25 years at the Toyota plant in Kentucky, working first half of my career in manufacturing area, and then the second half of my career worked in human resources. And so a lot of my experiences from the manufacturing actually was able to use in non-manufacturing environments. And so so we hope we'll be able to share some things with you today to help make a difference in your organization. So we're looking forward to it.
This is Tricia, your moderator. If you could please press play, Tracey, so that we can see your PowerPoint.
Is it up and going?
Yes, ma'am, it is, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you, Tricia. So I'm going to click to the first slide, and the title at the top is how to understand and implement continuous improvement thinking in any organization. That's actually the subtitle to the book, and I've highlighted the word understand because first, as Ernie and I had the trials and tribulations of learning a different culture, a new way of thinking, we first had to understand what was happening, the expectations, and we really try to start there with that understanding before we can get to an implementation or an implement stage. And then that, it kind of sets the stage to change our thinking or condition our thinking to look through a different lens. And when I say that, it's a way to see problems, frame problems, look at waste in a different way. A lot of times we look at waste and it's an accepted waste, and that's what we want to change. So there's a level of learning or layers of learning that start with first, being exposed and having an understanding, so then we can implement, coach through that and understand the thinking behind it. And many times we're often asked a really dynamic question of, what was it like to work there, or what was the dynamic, what was the day-to-day? And that's a deep question to answer quickly because there were so many facets to working there, with leadership, to people, problem solving, the reactivity of a car moving off the line every 57 seconds in our tact time and in our world. And so over probably 5 or 6 years, we kind of developed and created this formula that you see on the screen. and it's GTS to the 6th power plus E cubed equals DNA. And we're going to walk you through this formula. And within the book, it's kind of lined out in chapters. And each one of them will have a chapter. So in the book, from chapter 5 to chapter 12, we'll be breaking down GTS 1, for example, GTS 2, and then, you know, what is E cubed or E3, and what is DNA. So 2/3 of the book really gets into detail around the formula, and the first half is really how Ernie and I learned and understood and were conditioned from our Japanese trainers, from our leadership, and just, you know, living the culture, and how we, you know, developed our thinking over the years, and then how we transfer that knowledge to other industry outside of manufacturing, because really we ask clients and individuals we get the opportunities to talk to, you know, if you have people and you have processes that create outputs or products, or, you know, something that's created through a value stream, then you're going to have problems. And problems are opportunities, and we want to look at those as for improvement. So let's take a look at the GTS 1. I'm going to forward the slide there, and Ernie's going to go through the highlights of this slide, and it's very Gimbal related. So I'm going to turn it over to Ernie for GTS 1.
Yeah, this is actually the first step when we start talking about problem solving. This is the first step that we have to do, and in our experiences at Toyota, and also our experiences since we've been gone from Toyota, is many times this is the step that most people actually miss. They will go to the Gemba, but they have a predetermined idea of what they want the result to be, and so they go to the Gemba just to see, and then go back and start the problem solving. And so when we talk about going to the Gemba, it actually, for many years, my trainer would teach me at Toyota. He would keep teaching me how to go to the Gemba and how to see the process. And that means being able to see the process in the way that when you're not there, what is actually happening. And we talk about it in the slide and in the book about I have to be able to see through the process. And when we talk about going to the Gemba, it's really talking about where we go to where the work is being performed. And so the purposes when we go to the Gemba as a leader, really, we only have two purposes. The first purpose is we want to develop people that are going on the Gimbal with us. And that means teaching them to be able to see the process differently other than just looking at the result. And I'll touch on leading and lagging indicators in just a moment. The second is also I want to, as a leader, I want to break down barriers for other people to solve problems, to be able to have the capability to be able to fix problems at the correct level in the organization. Many times what we see is the leaders will go to the floor and say, okay, I'll fix this and I'll fix that. And what turns out to be the only time problem solving occurs is when the leader goes to the floor. And so we really talk about how do we understand the problem, and the first step is being able to go see the problem, be able to understand what's happening, what's creating the problem, looking at the process, and not only at that process, but you look at the process that it supports or it sends its product to, and you also look at the process that's coming in, so you get a full understanding. So really this whole first step is designed and set up for you to really get to the point of understanding what the process is without trying to have predetermined ideas or results. Many times when we go to organizations, we see, like for an example, they will say, hey, let's go on a Gimbal walk, and I'm always pretty excited because I really enjoy going to see processes. And then they'll take me out and see 2 or 3 A3s posted on the wall, or they'll take me and say, here's our results board. What do you think about that? And then they consider that to be a Gimbal walk. And what we teach them is, wait a minute, what value did you add to organization at that very first step of going to the Gemba? What value did you really add to the organization? And if you can't answer that question, you have to question why you're doing it. And so many times what we'll see also is that organizations are responding to a result, what we call leading and lagging indicators. And so if we're only using lagging indicators, then that's what we talk about the problem's actually managing you. So you're having to respond all the time. You're having to create an activity in result of the bad result. Whereas we try to talk about how do we get ahead of it, how do we manage the problem in the aspect of having leading indicators for us to be able to see the problems coming before we get the result. And so that's another item when we go to the Gimbal as a leader. We're trying to encompass the whole thing to understand what's unstable here, what's the problem here, where do we need to go next. And we always ask people, hey, are you managing the problem or is the problem managing you? And the other question we will ask at this point, does your organization like problems? Are problems your friend? At Toyota, and we talk about this in the book quite a bit, is, you know what, anytime we were at a point we didn't have problems, we considered that to be a problem. So it's always about, I'd rather understand the problem and see the problem early on and be able to manage it instead of the problem actually managing me. And so this is a real important step, and it's really, really difficult for folks to go out to the floor, especially if they're familiar with the area, not to have a predetermined idea of what they want the result to be. And so this kind of sets the stage when we go see for how can we do the next steps in GTS to the 6. So Tracy's going to take us into GTS 2. And
this is your moderator, Tricia. Before we go into GTS 2, can you take us back a little bit and give us an explanation of Gimbal for those that don't know what that terminology is? And also, if the first line that you have to deal with, if they're leaders, how would this apply?
I'm sorry, the second question, Kristen.
If the people that report to you are part of the leadership team, how does this apply?
Yeah, so part of the leadership, at any point, wherever you're doing, where you have processes, as the leader, I'm teaching other folks in my organization that's leaders of how to do the same thing or how to go break down problems. So in many cases, you would take the whole team, no matter what level you're at, and go through that process, go to the process, understand, being able to see where's the gaps at. Because really, part of what we're trying to do from a leadership perspective is to be able to grasp what is the problem and not use just data points or whatever. As my trainer used to tell me, we've got to use our eyes. And so the first part of your question was just to explain what the Gimbal is. And what we simply say is it's really anywhere that the work is being performed. So it's anywhere that you see value added into the process is what we call the Gimbal. And that can be, obviously in manufacturing, that's easy to see because you've got a process that's very visible. But it also may be a computer program that an engineer works on. It can be anywhere that an output is occurring is what we would call the Gimbal.
And to add to that, in service industry or maybe IT, it could be the day in the life of a paper going through an electronic trail of signatures, approvals. When it's not seen, the Gimbal, that Japanese term, is just kind of meaning the actual workplace where we can see the work. And then when we can't see the work in a tangible way, we have to understand, okay, what is happening in the process? Where does this go from your computer? What has to happen next? And we kind of do what we call a mini value stream of the steps. So, that Gimbal is an important and dynamic term of the actual work and where somebody is doing the process. And it doesn't have to be a widget. It can be many things, but it's the actual work. So we're going to go and switch to GTS 2 and talk about that for a little bit. So grasping the situation. So, we've got go to C, and once we've done GTS 1, the go to C, once we're there, as Ernie said, we've got to the Gimbal, we're there, we're attempting now to grasp the situation. This was a process we learned, and this is our way to articulate what we were doing each day, not only at an hourly level, but all the way up through leadership, and even our president would be on the floor each day supporting this. So, in grasping the situation, whenever our trainers would say that phrase, it meant we needed to, if you look at the bullet points, we needed to clarify or frame the problem. So grasping the situation was understanding, what is the ideal state, and, it could be the standard. A lot of companies have standards written. A lot of companies have standards that are kind of known but maybe not followed, and some are very kind of loosely in the air, so to speak. So we use the term ideal state to say, ideally, what does the customer internally or externally need this process to create as an output? So we need to look at that standard or ideal state. And then we need to look at what's currently happening, or the current state. And the difference between those two gives us our measurable gap. When we look at, this is kind of looking at just PDCA thinking in general. That's the plan, do, check, action process. And it's also, if we're documenting this for sharing our wisdom or our thinking, we're looking at the left side of the A3 and framing the problem. So if we can't measure it on the left side in our clarifying the problem, it's very difficult to understand how we did on the right side when we begin to try to countermeasure and find the root cause. So if we can't measure in the beginning, it's hard to measure at the end. Our trainers used to say, Tracey-san or Ernie-san, no measure, no do. And that was a simple phrase because of a little bit of our language barrier. But we learned it is to say every problem we need to have a way to measure it. Otherwise, how do you know if you're improving it or not? And so, that would be part of framing and clarifying the problem, is understanding, again, the ideal state or standard. Where are we to that standard currently? And then how are we measuring it? And that can be a number of something, how many times something is happening per day, occurrences. It can be cost, money, dollar perspectives. It could be percentages. However we want to measure, we have to look at that way to capture that gap. And once we understand that, within grasping the situation, there's this breakdown of the problem. What we find in a lot of organizations is people try to put the world hunger, boil the ocean level problems into one A3, into one, I'm gonna solve all of this in one. And they often come out with a large group of root causes that can spawn 20 or 30 countermeasures. It's kind of like the big fishbone that shows many things. And the undertone of the GTS formula is TBP, which is the Toyota Business Practice 8-step methodology. And it's written within the GTSs. So step 1, would be clarified. In the next part of the A3, we've got to break down the problem. We've got to look at, I use an analogy of a large pizza. We have been conditioned since our youth to slice up a pizza and eat it. We wouldn't have a whole pizza set in front of us, at least most of us anyway. Some people would say bring it on, but we slice it up and eat and enjoy one slice at a time. And in problems, I tend to see people trying to take that whole pizza on without slicing it. So this breakdown, we're prioritizing based on, what's the pain to the organization, and the pain meaning what's hitting our KPIs. And our KPIs could be, for example, quality. It could be safety, it could be productivity, it could be cost, it could be human resources and training and development, or just morale. So we need to understand the prioritization, and then once we select that prioritized problem, it's kind of like a Pareto mentality. We're looking at that focus item first, we're going to select the one, we're going to go see the process of that. So it's kind of like taking a slice, we're going to go see the process, and we're going to find what's called the point of occurrence. where within this process or this value stream or this step-by-step sequence of events, it could be standardized work, where is the discrepancy happening? And so this breakdown was something that the Toyota Institute came up with for Toyota to allow us not to try to put too much in one A3. So it's kind of like we're looking at a slice and we're managing it one piece at a time. So we might have 8 or 9 slices that will, it'll take to solve the entire gap, but that allows us to only be dealing with several root causes, maybe only 2 to 3 at a time. And then we go to set the target for that particular prioritized problem, so that slice, so to speak. We're going to set the target to that, getting a how much and a by when, and that gives us a measurability when we get to the right side. So we want to set a challenging target. And then for that particular process and that point of occurrence, we're going to ask why in root cause analysis. And so, that kind of funnels, I kind of look at grasping the situation as kind of a funneling process down to, let's ask why about a particular aspect of the problem, not necessarily the whole gap, but one portion, one slice. So in grasping the situation, it's really doing a lot in allowing us to frame in PDCA the left side of the A3 by looking at a measurable gap, breaking it down into manageable pieces, and then setting a target to fix that point of occurrence, and then asking why for that portion. So this is a very important step. It's probably one of our longest chapters in the book because in the TBP process, in the 8-step process, it's covering steps 1 through 4 of the 8-step Toyota business practice. So it's really a dynamic step, and there's a lot to it. And if you follow the process will speak back. If you can listen and understand, it'll let you know if you didn't have the correct gap. It'll let you know if you had preconceived notions. If you have too many root causes, it might take you back to say you didn't break the problem down into enough pieces. So there's a lot of built-in, what we would call pokeokes, which are fail-safe devices within this thinking that's a checking mechanism. So it's a really neat aspect of our culture that allowed us to drill down to the specifics. So I'm going to take us to GTS 3 and let go through the next portion of what happens now once we've asked why. What are we looking at from the next aspect? And so that's GTS 3, which is now that we understand what the problem is, we've got to get to the solution. So if we go back and recap and just review, we've gone to C, we've grasped the situation and understanding, what is the problem, we've broken it down, we've asked, to see the process, we've found the point of occurrence, we're asking why. Now we've understood root cause, and now it's taking us to the solution. So we've got to determine what are the countermeasures now, how are we going to remedy this issue, fix this process, and take care of that root cause. So we have a way to look at kind of brainstorming different countermeasures. We have a tool to narrow based on specific criteria. It could be by cost, it could be by feasibility, it could be by effectiveness, it could be risk. There's a lot of things that an organization would want you to look through the lens and understanding that. So once we narrowed it down, we would then create a Gantt chart that tells us, okay, what are we going to do to implement this countermeasure, which addresses the root cause, which in turn hopefully fixes that process that has a point of occurrence. And so what are we going to do? And then who is responsible? So we have some accountability there for the who. And then where is it going to take place? So sometimes we need the where, the specific area that's going to have change implemented. And then the when would be the timeline. So a Gantt chart really begins the accountability of stepping through, here are the countermeasures that are going to address this particular slice that we chose to pick first, and go through and make sure those root causes that are creating that point of occurrence in the process. So it kind of tracks back and forth. If you look at each step of an A3, it's really a cause and effect between each step. So this solution is very important. And this is also in the 8 steps. This is steps 5 through 7. So you understand your countermeasures, and then we're going to see those through. So if you look at the second bullet, now that we have our Gantt chart and we understand, what's going to happen, who's going to do it, where is it going to take place, and the timeline around that, then we have to communicate. We have to allow people how we learned it there. If you look, the reporting, informing, and consulting is saying we need to communicate through reporting to our leader, or it could be leaders upward from that. So we need to always let our supervisor or leader know that the changes that may take place. We want to always inform the team or the folks that have touch points to the team. So the reporting, informing, and then consulting are ensuring that all the stakeholders that are involved or people that have a touch point to this process understand, because what we find is a lot of times, oh, we've got the root cause, oh, we've got a great countermeasure, let's hurry and implement, and we forget to tell the people involved, and it creates a little havoc because somebody comes to the process the next day and it's totally different than what it was, and we failed to give that person the information necessary to do their job, and then that can create potential quality issues or productivity. And so this communication piece is really important, and not only in the countermeasures, but really throughout the whole process we want to have this. But it's noted when you make change, it's kind of a change point management process that we need to ensure everybody involved is, understands what's going to take place and has been engaged with. We're not we're not going to tell, sell, and convince versus we want to engage, involve, and empower. And so we do this through communication, and then we have some checkpoints of how effective were we. We want to look at the customer internally and externally. We want to look and reflect on our own learning, and that's very important. What did I learn from this process? And in my go-see and my grasping of the situation, what did I learn for my next time to be able to coach? Because our trainers would say, we will always be leading and learning simultaneously. And so we always need what they would call Hansei, which is reflection or self-reflection on the process. And then lastly, the company connection. Did we connect to a company key performance indicator, KPI? Did we improve quality or safety or productivity or cost? Or maybe it was all. Maybe there was a connection to all. But we need to make that connection, because in a little bit we're going to talk about the Hoshin-Conry or the strategy deployment or business plan. That, why are we doing these things? And so we have to make the connection, as Ernie said earlier in the Gimbal part, we have to maintain value and ensure that what we're doing is value added to the organization, and we do that through KPI connection. So we're going to go onward to GTS4.
So the next step as we get through the solution and we get the process back under control is get to standardization. And this is where we see tremendous gaps. Many places that we visit don't have standardization, and they're operating by procedures or by tribal knowledge or some other way. And so what our trainers would always tell us is, without standards, you can't make improvement. So without understanding where you are, it's really hard to be able to understand if you're making a difference and improving. It might feel good and look good, but what's the process telling you? And so in this step, really it's talking about how do we get to the standard. Now, we get many questions about standards. As a matter of fact, we could spend a lot of time talking about this slide alone in the aspect of how important standardization is. And the first thing we get, the question is, how many standards do we need? Because people see standardization as very overwhelming. And what we talk about is you know, start in organizations who don't have a lot of standards, you start with where's your most critical process and do one standard at a time. And you need standards anywhere you need to control the output of the process. And so that doesn't mean you need to standard everything in an organization, but you need to have it to where you can standard in place to control the output of the organization. And so this step becomes very important and very critical to making continuous improvement work for the future. And many times we'll get to this step with organization, and when we get there, we go, well, we don't have a standard. And so we'll go back and say, well, how do you know you have a problem if you don't have a standard? And then we will actually take them backwards out of PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act, and go back to SDCA, which says, okay, before we can improve, we need to standardize. We need to standardize what we're currently doing. Something is happening. Let's start there. Let's make a standard for that, understand where's the gaps, and continue making improvement. And so many times when we're working in organizations, we see, you know, they have a kind of a generic problem. Well, we need better productivity, or we want to make a 10% improvement. Well, where are you at? Well, I don't know. We just want to make a 10% improvement. And so we'll take them backwards to say, what's the current standard? And this is also where we'll start to see problems with data, and the fact that, excuse me, the fact that we react so much to lagging indicators or results that we never get to the point where we can measure what's the capability of the process. And so this is where we start talking about, and we need to obviously document the process or the standard. We have to train people to it. Just because we write it on a piece of paper, it doesn't mean everybody understands it. And then the third bullet point there talks about auditing. And we were always taught, and I believe this from my experiences, a standard without auditing is not really a standard. So if you can't develop a system to be able to check the standard periodically, then really people will go back to doing what they normally do or wanted to do or whatever. It will not maintain the standard. So the discipline and accountability associated with auditing and following a standard, because remember we said the standard is what you need to control, so therefore we put enough standardization in to control it, and therefore we have to have a discipline and accountability associated with that standard. And so, like I said, we could spend a lot of time talking about standardization, because this seems to be, as we deal with organizations, the first gap that we start seeing is we got problems, but we don't have standards, and we look at problems from results and not leading. And this goes back to what we talked about in the very first slide, related to when we get to this point, we can identify whether the problem's managing the people or the people's managing the process based on the results that we're starting to see in standardization. So the standardization is incredibly important, and I'll give you a really quick story why it's important. As many of you know, we had a hurricane here in Florida last in October, and unfortunately or fortunately, we were not home. We were actually with a client out in the Midwest, and when we left, the hurricane was supposed to be well offshore, but while we're there in the Midwest with our client, all of a sudden the hurricane became much closer to the shore. And so we have custom-made hurricane shutters for our home here in Florida, and so I had developed a standardized worksheet of how to put those hurricane shutters on, and I'd never used it, honestly. This is the first time since we'd ever been here that we'd ever used it. And I would develop the standardized worksheet and had the standard of where the hurricane shutters were, located up in the attic. I had visual controls on each one of the shutters that said this is the window number 1, and I had an outline showing which window was number 1. And so we actually had to get a family member and a neighbor to come put those hurricane shutters on for us while we were on transit and transportation back home, or getting back home. And literally they were able to do that following our standard in about an hour and 15 minutes. And if we hadn't have had the standard, I'm not sure they could have ever completed that. So it just shows you, even in our personal life, standards, we expect standards, but we also need to use standards to be something that are beneficial to us. So that was a huge impact for us in having things standardized, visually located. I actually have everything in the attic numbered in boxes, so and a master sheet downstairs, so they knew exactly where in the attic to go find the boxes and what was in each box. So standards are our best friend, and contrary to what a lot of people believe, that standards actually constrict the process, and if we do too much standardization or unnecessary standardization, that means we're writing standards just to write standards and not to control the process. It can be constricting, and so we always try to look at how to connect the value. Very important step, and in order to not only do the rest of the GTS to the 6, but also to do problem solving for the future. So it's very important that we get the standard in place, understand where we're at, and what do we want to go to.
And I think, to end and getting ready to go to the GTS 5 is, our trainers taught us, we first want to define the standard and then achieve the standard and then maintain, and what Ernie was talking about, the auditing and accountability. And once we have that stability, which takes us into the GTS 5, then we're able to improve. So you think about define, achieve, maintain, improve is what we're trying to get through in a continuous improvement environment. Going back to the subtitle of the book, you have to have the standard. That goes back to Taiichi Ohno in saying there can be no Kaizen without a standard. That holds so true, and we just have to ensure that we understand what the true standards are. And I'll leave this slide with one example to just think about. In our real life, we go to the grocery store, or we may go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a home store, and there's visual controls, and the aisles are labeled, and we go in and we know where everything is because our lead time to get in and out is important for us. And just think about life if those grocery stores just put everything in the middle of the floor and said, we have it all here, now you have to find it. We had to cut costs. We can't put it in the aisles anymore. And think about that frustration. So we do have high levels of standardization for external. We just need to find that in our internal work life that creates that same need. So on to GTS 5, which is get to sustainability. If we think about maintaining a standard, and this is, getting us to the point of, oh, we've got to improve. Well, we can't just rapidly improve without making sure we have sustainability in the process. So, I'm gonna let Ernie talk just a little bit about this kind of sustainability and the aspects around that, because it's very important.
So if you go back to the what Tracey just talked about in define, achieve, maintain, improve, this is the maintain stage, and here we also see many gaps here when we work with organizations in the fact that they can actually do it once. When they make the improvement, they can do it once, and then they think they have success. And then so we ask them, okay, what's the output need to be related to the leading indicator for the process, and then can you do it a week? Can you do it a month? Can you do it a year? Whatever the right amount of time to understand. Define, achieve. Achieve means do it once. Maintain means, okay, it's stable. The process is stable. I can see that. I can look at the data and see that. I can watch the process and see that. So it's very important that we have that stability, because once if we try to make improvements and we're not stable, again, it takes us back to we don't understand what we did to fix the problem, or why it's not being fixed. And so it's very important to get to that maintain piece or the stability piece. And then this is also where your leading versus your lagging indicators come in. So every process has indicators, and every process does not need to be measured. Again, critical processes, but when you're doing problem solving and you're getting this sustainability, we need to understand what do we need to look at to understand this. Is it being stable or not? What was being affected before, and then what in the process do we need to measure to be able to understand what the capability is, but where is it at? So we also talk about, and when we talk about leading and lagging, and we always talk about we need probably, you know, and this varies company by company, but somewhere about a 50-50 ratio of leading indicators versus lagging indicators. And we always talk about the leading indicators being the tool we want to use to be able to change the outcome before it becomes a result. What it means is it should be telling us that the leading indicator should be telling us when something's going wrong before it gets to the point where we can't change it. And a result means that we've got a result, like for an example, many companies has financial targets or goals. That's a result, but what do we go back to the process? So it would tell us where in the process we need to look as we have leading indicators. So leading is always what we call process indicators. Lagging would always be result indicators. Predictive is what we would say with the leading indicators, or it helps us understand what we need to change before we get to the result. When we get to the result, it's reactive. So we have to do something to change the result the next time. And so really encourage people to look at leading indicators, and just like standardized work, they're hard. They're not easy to do, but once you are able to get that, it's so valuable to you and your organization to be able to see that stability. So Tracey's going to take us into GTS to the 6, and then we'll do some summary slides from there.
Yeah, so the last GTS is get to stretch. You know, when we were coming up with the GTS acronyms, this one was kind of like, I know what I need to say here, but I need to make it into a GTS. Everything else is flowing. So it's get to stretch goal or stretch target, you know, that next level improvement. So that stretch goal is what that means. So again, we've determined at this point we've got sustainability or stability in the process, and now we're looking to raise the bar. You know, that our term internally was Kaizen. That was the Japanese term for continuous improvement. And we never wanted to be complacent with, oh, we're meeting the expectation, let's wipe our brow and, you know, celebrate. You know, we didn't have a lot of celebrations for meeting the expectations because we were really too busy setting up to raise the bar. And we did this, you know, maybe, you know, a few times a year. You know, if we were stable in a process for over 8 weeks, and we were showing that, let's say, for example, we met a 2% scrap rate, you know, our trainers and our leaders would expect that to be 1%. If you're making it at 2%, that's too easy. So, you know, they would say, we need to raise the bar. We've stabilized, and now 1% is new target or new standard. Now you have problem. Please go and fix. And so that raise the bar on the standard was a common thinking. After we reached it and stabilized, we were ready to improve. So when you do that, again, it goes back, we have to communicate what we've done or changed, or, you know, it could be a policy, it could be a checklist, it could be a standardized work, it could be, you know, a day in the life of a document. We have to train people to this new thinking or this new method. And, you know, this sets us up, this whole GTS process, it's really cyclical. So it's like PDCA, it truly is PDCA. We're just putting it in a fun kind of process formula for it. But it sets us up to, you know, ensure that continuous improvement is never ending. You know, a lot of people, we talk about lean. You know, lean is a very dynamic word and is used in different aspects, but you never are, quote, lean and you get there and you celebrate. You know, lean is never ending, and it's a journey to the next improvement, to the next improvement. It's not necessarily a destination we reach and raise our hands. You know, you might have small celebrations, but you're always moving and looking towards the next. So the get to stretch just sets us up to be able to really start this process over. And, you know, we've got a new problem. We've got to, you know, we've raised the bar on the standards. So now we're back to go and see and grasping the situation. So it's never ending, just as PDCA is in all organizations in that thinking. And so it's really important to ensure that we don't become complacent or settle for status quo. And so we're going to move to E3. So the formula, you know, is the GTS to the 6th plus E3 or E cubed. So that means if we can get everybody every day engaged, in this thinking, that's really what we learned at our experiences at Toyota and all the North American plants we had experience with, especially Toyota Motor Manufacturing Kentucky, the TMMK plant. This was everybody. There was no labels. The expectation, there was no, at this point, this was 1988 when we were exposed, there was no lean description. That word hadn't been coined yet from the machine that changed the world with Daniel Jones and Jim Womack. There was no term. And our trainers really, they came up with a really simple word for it, and it was a 3-letter word. It was called JOB. It was our job. And so every day, everybody engaged in this thinking that we just described through you is very essential throughout the organization to create the culture, the climate that's ever evolving and learning. And, it kind of goes back to people are really, this goes back to something Sakichi Toyota, who was kind of the father of Toyota and the loons back in the late 1800s, is people are the most important asset of the organization, and they can also be the determinant of the rise and fall. So we have to always engage people and look upon them as the most important thing, because their minds and their ability to think, and if we can harness that and have organizations see through the same lens, it's very powerful. And what we experienced, we just feel very blessed at the timing that everything happened to learn from some of the trainers that actually had ties to Taiichi and the Toyota family. And we got to meet some of the Toyota family in those early days. So it was just a phenomenal experience of everybody being engaged every day. And so that...
So when we talk about everybody engaged every day, it's like, you have to actually build your culture around that's the way we do business. And what that means is we talked about DAME, or Define, Achieve, Maintain, Improve. We talked about SDCA, Standardize, Do, Check, Act. We talked about going to the Gimbal, which Mr. Cho, who was our president at our Kentucky plant, for several years. Then he came up with a quote that says, "You go see, ask why, and show respect." And it's all about the people. And Mr. Cho made several speeches while he was there, and his message in the speeches was always, how do I make the team member more successful? How do I make the last employee we hired more successful? And in my experiences at Toyota, I can tell you, in interactions with Mr. Cho and other leaders of the organization, it was always about, as a leader, I was expected to develop people. And we always kind of coined it to say, you know what true lean means? It means continuous development of people. And so it's very important. And in this step, or this concept, the last person you hire needs to be able to make connection of why their job's important to the output of the company, or what we call true north. How do you come in and understand why it's important I do my job every day, and how does that connect to company success? And being able to make that connection, then it's a little easier for me to keep you engaged. And when you lose that connection, people sometimes become complacent and are not as engaged, and it's really hard to get them re-engaged. And so it's a challenge for us to every day talk about how do we make every person, we always said every person coming in could be the next president, so we need to train them to be the next president, knowing that all of them couldn't be, but our concept was that we need to develop them into taking my role or my responsibility someday.
So yes, very important there. And to finish the formula, we're gonna briefly talk about DNA and then open up for questions. So DNA, there's a dual meaning there, and this was one I wanted to explain just briefly. We go in depth greatly in the book about DNA, but for the formula, it's kind of discipline and accountability. If you say "and" real fast, it sounds like "in." So some of the key aspects of the culture at Toyota was DNA, and in the micro sense, you see there is, we had discipline and accountability for standardization, for developing people, for the visuals that we were responsible for, and feedback, and just the whole aspect. You know, I know we talked about A3 earlier, and you know, I see one of the questions there, and A3 was just it really wasn't anything but the size of paper. If you could do the drop down box, it's 11 by 17, and that was a way for us to share on a document that was just one sheet of paper. We kind of called it lean communication, or 5S of information. And so, you know, the micro level DNA, the discipline and accountability, was to always share our knowledge, document when we could our thinking, and always align it there to the company goals and the true north of the organization. And so that at an individual level, we have a responsibility for our micro discipline and accountability for what we say we're going to do, and we're going to follow that standard, and, you know, ensure that we can see gaps that way. And then the macro DNA is kind of what we look at as the human DNA. So the macro DNA in the organization is really those fundamental characteristics. It's being able to see through the same lens. That thinking really should cut across what we call vertically and horizontally throughout the organization. Vertically meaning from the primary process owner, kind of the PPO, all the way up to the CEO or the president. So vertically, we need to think this way, and also horizontally, which is through all the functional areas that can be, you know, some people may call that the silos, but we tend to say functional areas because each one of them has a function to the macro level value stream. And it could be HR, it could be accounting or payroll, it can be engineering, research and design, IT, manufacturing, you know, a plethora of functional areas in many organizations. So this thinking, this whole formula is kind of Ernie and I's way to articulate what it was like to be Toyota team members, not only hourly but into our salary roles as we grew into leaders into the organization. We were actually tested early on for our leadership capabilities. So this thinking really creates the climate or culture that, you know, really looks at the impact for your long-term sustainability and growth as people as a whole. You know, you want to not push, you know, I always tell folks, if we're pushing people to a class or forcing them, you know, their learning kind of diminishes because they feel like it's not their idea. We really want to transform that to a pull for learning, as I've got there at the bottom part. And when you can see that transformation happen, the line of sight for a team member, and I'll close with that, we try to teach line of sight with this whole formula is saying, you know, what is my role and responsibility in this organization? You know, where do I fit in the functional areas? And then what's my work responsibility? And then I have to ask with that, what's my job's purpose? And then what are the goals that are guiding my job's purpose? And then how does that align with the true north of the company goal? So it allows me to look at my micro DNA, myself, my work, as it pertains to how is it affecting the macro, the company goals. And I think it's very important to be able to see how I fit, and that I'm an important ingredient to the overall recipe of, you know, how successful we are. So I will conclude. I know we went just a few minutes over there, but I will turn it back over to Tricia if there's any questions out there that people want to ask.
Well, we want to thank you for your time. This has been great information, and we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, what is the biggest issue involved in implementation?
I think first in implementation, people, let me first say they're trying to look for a quick fix, and they think, hey, we'll go do lean, and next week we'll be in good shape. And the biggest hurdle we see is people starting to understand this is not a tool or a program. I mean, you can, like the A3 is a tool, but continuous development of people becomes the way we do business. And so I think understanding that it's not a quick fix, it's not, you know, I tell people, I worked at Toyota for 25 years. I was learning day one, and I was learning the last day I was there. And it was continuous development of people that was able to keep them engaged and keep the continuous improvement. And that continuous improvement is a journey, it's not a destination. So it's really hard because people get really connected to the results, and they say, you know, we want quick results. If we're going to spend money up front, we want quick results now. And the reality of it is, it's just the start of a culture shift of a continuous development company. And then I think the second piece is companies really have a hard time understanding which piece they need to start with. And so what we tell companies is we try to do let them talk about where you at in your company, where you at with standardization, where you at with people involvement, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're able to come up with a strategy that says, okay, here's where we need to start developing, here's where we have our gaps, here's where we need to start developing our people, and then we go from that point on. And so I think those are two of the biggest areas that people struggle with, and particularly the one of, okay, let's put A3s in place. Well, why are we making more money? And that's the strategy. And really, you have to shift from hiding problems to exposing problems. And you have to have a culture that's okay with that. And man, that's pretty tough. I mean, it's pretty tough to say.
It's a paradigm shift in thinking.
Yeah, problems are our friends, not our enemies. So we want to embrace them, fix them. We always said, you know, our kind of motto when I was working at Toyota was, I'd rather expose the problem here than have my customer expose it for me. And so that's kind of the rationale we used.
I think that was excellent. I think when I heard you say problems are our friends, I can think that that's a whole new webinar that needs to happen, because definitely many organizations have to go through a paradigm shift to stop hiding the problem and make it our friend. The other question is I think it was GPS 3. You stated tell, yell, and something else, and it was missed by the audience. And why don't you kind of recap that for us?
Yeah, so, and we do talk about this in the book a little bit, and I think probably throughout it all is, you know, our trainers always conditioned us to never tell somebody something, you know, just go and tell and sell and try to convince them. You know, that means as a leader, you already have a preconceived notion, or you're just wanting them to do it because, quote, you say so. And so that was never a good leadership practice, to go tell, sell, and convince, versus they would rather us, you know, go and see, you know, be out there where the work is happening at the Gimbal, and we'd rather engage with the person. We want to involve them, you know, with the process and empower them. And so the minute we shift from, you know, the tell, sell to involve, engage, you begin to form what we call the mutual trust and respect factor, that, hey, this leader here is actually listening to me. And you know, one of our courses that we had to pass to be leaders was actually how to effectively listen. And you know, most of the folks going through that class, about 80% failed the first time, because it's very difficult to listen without, you know, trying to think of your rebuttal or your reply, or even interrupt, because you're so strong in what you think. And so our ability to listen, engage, involve, and empower folks, and just be there as what we would call a servant leader, where we're there to, you know, we work for people, they don't work for us. And so that sell, tell, convince, we need to try to, you know, condition ourselves away from that, and catch ourselves when we do it. And you know, it kind of goes around assumptions as well. When we start to make an assumption, you know, we need to stop and say, am I assuming this? Or, you know, let's go and see and engage with the person and find out the fact.
So as I wrap up, there's two more questions that hopefully we can get to. One is, how does this methodology work in a union environment? Is it easier to create the culture? And the second, which I'll just go ahead and give you, is to create an improvement roadmap for a company, where would you start? And what would you say are the main steps to follow? And lastly, if you can wrap up with when you believe your book will be out. I noticed that it's on Amazon at 40% off for pre-sales. So those are the three things that come up last, and I'll let you take it from there, and then I'll close out.
So I'll start with the union part, and our experience has been is the goals for the union and companies are very similar. So actually, most companies we worked with the union in the plant actually has been very embracing and not seen any big issues at all. I mean, there's always little odds and ends of things you have to work around about how to write standards, how to time standards, and all those kinds of things. But honestly, I've not seen it be a stumbling block at all, whether it be a union or a non-union plant. So I think that's I think it's very, and I think the unions are very open to working with companies to be able to make improvements because they understand the logic of the business as well.
You know, some of our experiences with them, as I was just talking about, we involve them. We have them there as a representative for the people, and we ask their opinions. We ask questions, and from our experiences with several of our clients with unions, they're ready to listen and be open. We've just got to bridge some of the gaps between and try to grasp the situation. We go back to and try to grasp the situation. So, and to the second part of the question, kind of going through a roadmap, where do you start? Obviously it's not, cut and dry the same for every company, but with us and how we learned, we look at kind of 5 S's, and that is kind of looking at sifting, sorting, straightening, sweeping, kind of cleaning, and then standardizing it and saying, okay, we're going to sustain. So how can we standardize? And then once we look at that, we look at what's the problem solving capabilities and a level of kind of value streaming out processes within the problem solving. And then, as we talked about throughout, is how strong are your standards? Where's the discipline and accountability to those? Are there accountability for your standards out there? And how strong are they? And do people think they have to follow them? There's that as well. So you look at an aspect of 5S problem solving, standardization, and then a way to visualize. We had visual boards to kind of always show where we were to where the standard is and where our gaps. Every hour we documented where we were to the standard. So we knew hourly and daily and weekly where we were to the expectations. So to kind of wrap up how we try to go in and ask questions is usually around problem solving, standardization, visualization, and then probably Hoshin or strategy deployment. How do we look at those leading and lagging KPIs? And lastly, around the book, it is our knowledge right now that should be out mid-May. That's the target. That's what we've been told. My hope it may be a little bit sooner, but around the second week of May. And as we know, we'll share that information. We've got the blog. We share a lot of things. We're both on LinkedIn, Twitter. We try to be on social media to share, but that is the target for the book.
Well, Ernie and Tracey Richardson, thank you so much for today's webinar. We had terrific engagement and it was great information. On behalf of ASQ Lean Enterprise Division, we thank you for attending today's webinar series. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.